Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and today we're talking about X-Men. But before we get into that, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave a comment. We've got a great community here, and it's all thanks to you guys. Thank you so much for being here. With all that said, let's dive in. The prologue to this one takes place in the year 2013 in a world where the mutant hunting Sentinels have taken over. The X-Men of 2013 include Bishop, aka Lucas Bishop, Cable, aka Nathan Christopher Charles Summers, Nocturne, aka Talia Josephine Wagner, Phoenix 2, Rachel Summers, Shadowcat, Kate Pride, and Shard, aka Shard Bishop. They travel back in time to the year 1979, where they are followed by Nimrod, a new kind of ultimate sentinel. The X-Men evade Nimrod and prevent Mystique and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from taking out Senator Robert Kelly, an event which in their timeline led to Ronald Reagan's defeat in the 1980 presidential election. His opponent in that timeline won because he promised to deal with the ever rising threat of mutants and find a quote unquote permanent solution to criminals like Mystique. Kate Pride dies at the hands of Nimrod, but not before she saves the world by destroying his. Without Senator Kelly becoming a martyr for that cause, Nimrod's timeline does not come to pass, which means that Bishop, Cable, Nocturne, Phoenix 2, and Shard are stranded in 1979 with no future to return to. So is Nimrod, by the way, but he has a ton of different powers, including shape shifting. So Nimrod assumes the identity of a man named Sebastian Gilberti, and as Bastion, he begins trying to course correct by getting a job working for the government, working on the Sentinel program. Meanwhile, Cable and Phoenix 2 are at the X Mansion in Westchester, New York, which is super weird for them being around Scott and Jean. So it's very Back to the Future, like when Marty McFly and George McFly are father and son hanging out, even though they're the same age. And that brings us to the main plot. Dazzler is around for all of this. And at night, she is now a singer at Studio 54, which most people don't realize is actually the new Hellfire Club in New York City. It's where all the most wealthy movers and shakers spend their nights, reveling in various forms of hedonism and debauchery, which, of course, is what the Hellfire Club was always about. That and gaining more and more power, of course. And the leader of this incarnation of the Hellfire Club is the Red King, who has the spy skill from first edition DC Heroes. And that has a sub skill called brainwashing, which the Red King is extremely adept at. And brainwashing in DC Heroes allows you to change another character's motivation. So, for instance, he could literally talk a lawful good character into being chaotic evil, or vice versa. And now, poor Dazzler has fallen victim to this villain. So now her motivation is controlled by Red King. So when Dazzler goes to the owner's office at Studio 54, he's using the brainwashing skill on various starlets of that era, like Adrienne Barbeau, Bo Derek, Brooke Shields, etc. And the brainwashing skill takes hours, and the Red King hates being interrupted because it means he has to start all over again from the beginning. So Dazzler waits around on him to finish, and when he does, then she reports in. Just as the Black Widow is under Red King's control and is his spy on the Avengers team, so too is Dazzler his spy on the X-Men team. So she tells him everything. She tells him about the attempted assassination of Senator Kelly, and she also tells him about the new X-Men from the future. And his interest is piqued. He says that Phoenix 2 and Shard probably know things about the future that could be useful to him. Dazzler says that the future won't happen. And Red King counters that the later events might not happen now, but events closer to the present day, like stock market trends and things of that nature, might be worth knowing. So he tells Dazzler to come up with an excuse to bring the women to Studio 54 so Emma Frost can use her mind probe to see what they know. He says some of it might be useful, some of it is probably useless, but either way, he wants them. So Dazzler says, "Yes, Master," then returns to the X Mansion. And the next day, Dazzler invites Rachel Summers to come to Studio 54 along with Shard as a sort of girls' night out. Kitty Pryde, and to be clear here, this is the young Kitty Pryde native to this timeline. She's fine, right? She's perfectly healthy. It's her older counterpart from the future that was killed. So I don't want anybody to be confused there. At any rate, so Kitty Pryde and Jean ask if they can come too. But Dazzler tells Kitty she's not old enough to get in. Jean offers to go, though, as an excuse to get to know Rachel better. It's also worth mentioning at this point that Jean has already been going by the name Phoenix for a while now, and that Jean is more or less possessed by the Phoenix Force. And her daughter Rachel was also possessed by the Phoenix Force of that future timeline. So now there are two Phoenix Forces that coexist, and they seem to awaken something in each other, which means that Jean's senses are now amplified. So it starts with little things like enjoying the taste of food more than she normally would. But what is really going on here is this change is bringing about the birth of the Dark Phoenix. So Jean's love of pleasure is going to get stronger and stronger. Anyways, so that night, the girls go to Studio 54, and Rachel and Shard comment that they've never ever seen anything like this. Because in the future that they come from, there are no nightclubs, there are no lines with red velvet ropes. In fact, the future they come from is an awful lot like what we saw in the Terminator movies. And as a brief aside, I am completely convinced that those movies were directly inspired by Days of Future Past. Because when James Cameron was going to make a Spider-Man movie back in the day, he commented in several interviews that he was an avid Marvel fan. Anyways, getting back on topic. So the point is that Shard and Rachel aren't used to this sort of thing, and Rachel gets uncomfortable and bails, which makes Jean sad since that was the whole reason Jean came. Dazzler tells them they can still have a nice time. And of course, what's really going on here is that Dazzler knows Shard still has future knowledge if he wants to bring her before the Red King and Emma Frost. And for anyone wondering why Jean can't read Dazzler's mind and be aware of this fact, we established that Jean doesn't read the minds of her friends because she sees it as a violation of privacy. So the girls are led into the club and they do some disco dancing. And when they go to order drinks, they are told by a bartender that drinks are on the house, courtesy of the owner. He also tells Dazzler that her boss wants to see her. So Dazzler and the other girls walk into the Red King's office. Once there, Emma Frost uses her powers to do kind of what we saw in the comic book version of the story, which is that Jean Grey sees what she thinks are memories of a past life, but in reality, these are illusions and mind tricks. And the Red King begins to use that brainwashing skill of his, on her. But what the villains don't know is Jean has mind blocks in place created by Charles Xavier. And as they begin to manipulate Jean's mind, those blocks come down. Dazzler, Jean, and Shard don't come home that night. And the next day, the X-Men start to worry, so they go to the Hellfire Club during the day when there's no crowds there. But the Red King is ready for them. And Jean Grey is now the Black Queen. And she is completely convinced that this is where she belongs and that in a past life, she and Red King were lovers, which is, of course, extremely upsetting for Scott Summers. Believing that the woman he loves is still in there somewhere, Scott uses the psychic rapport that he and Jean share, and he goes into her mind and separates her from the mental avatar of the Red King who's been manipulating her. And while the Red King has a lot of his bases covered, he didn't know about the special rapport. So Scott succeeds and Jean is freed. And while he was doing that, the New York Police Department shows up in force because, like we said before, the Hellfire Club is all about connections, gaining political power, controlling local authorities. So we find out here that the Hellfire Club actually kind of controls the NYPD. So Wolverine says he's flattered that the Hellfire Club summoned an entire army of cops just to deal with the X-Men. And that's when Jean says, against an army, you would have at least stood a chance of survival. Against me, you have none. Wolverine says, Jeannie? But the Black Queen says, hear me, X-Men. No longer am I the woman you knew. I am fire and life incarnate. Now and forever, I am the Phoenix. Now witness the birth of a god. And with that, Studio 54 explodes in a massive fireball, spraying glass at the cops outside, shaking the ground, and knocking people off their feet. When the smoke clears, it was Dazzler who turned the Cthulhu sound at Ground Zero into light energy, which she then turned into force fields, which she placed around everyone here. The Red King, whose nice red suit is on fire, looks around at the remnants of Studio 54 and says, damn it. Dark Phoenix then streaks up into the stars. In the sky, the Phoenix Force takes the form of a huge bird. And at that moment, in the Baxter Building, home of the Fantastic Four, the various gadgets of Reed Richards read an energy of unbelievable proportions from someone whose power could rival that of Galactus. On Manhattan's west side, Spider-Man clings to the side of a building. And as soon as the Firebird image appeared in the sky, his spider sense went crazy. In Greenwich Village, Doctor Strange senses great mystic power and great passion, but also great evil. But he knows yet not what this means. And on the edge of space, the Silver Surfer senses a kindred soul, a child of the stars, in many ways so much like him, but in other ways, not at all. She is human, flawed, and that flaw bids fair to destroy her. So the Silver Surfer vows to help her if he can. But even as the Sky Rider of the Spaceways speeds around the globe, And even as others become aware of her existence, the Dark Phoenix bids farewell to her homeworld and soars spaceward to fulfill her malefic destiny. And that brings us to our epilogue, which takes place in April 1983, when Scott Summers is in Alaska. And while there, he meets Madeline Pryor, the clone of Jean Grey. They embark on a whirlwind romance, and that August, they are married. Scott's father and the Starjammers show up for the wedding. The Shi'ar Empress is here, along with her Imperial Guard, as are the rest of the X-Men, which now includes Rogue and her little boy, Matrix. I would talk more about Matrix, but that's a story for another day. We enjoyed this one. Hopefully you did too. If so, as always, smash like, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave a comment. From all of us here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.